Welcome to On My Couch. So my co-host Sue and I wanted to create an opportunity to talk with really super smart people about topics that are of interest to us and related to the work that we do. So we created On My Couch, which is a vidcast. The intent is to have a great conversation. So really it's about learning more, asking really clever people about the great stuff they do, and then applying it either to our work life or to sometimes our personal life as well. So some introductions first. So my name's Damien. I'm the owner and founder of OMC Group. And what OMC Group does is we focus on leadership, culture, strategy, and performance. But fundamentally, our why is how do we help people work better together? What we do is we normally don't date our fidcasts because we sort of keep them trying live. But it's early Jan 2025, and I'm not sure about you, but normally at this time of year, I'm thinking about maybe I could work less, or maybe I could work differently. You get that time to reflect, to sort of say, hang on, what's important to me? And so that's why we thought it'd be a really great opportunity to have a chance to have a talk with our guest, Bel Morgan. So I'll introduce Bel in a minute, but really what we want to do is explore the theme of flexible work. So, as I said, Bel, I'll introduce you in a minute. So you've made the sort of transition to portfolio work, I think is the correct terminology. So maybe to get us started, what does this different way of working mean for you, and what are the benefits? Maybe tell us your story.
Thanks, Damien. So as you mentioned, I had a corporate career for 30 years and I loved absolutely every minute of that. And then there was an opportunity to sort of step back and rethink about, as you've just described, what does the future look like? So the opportunity really to do something different and to leverage my skills in a different way. And I think that's, whether it's flexible, that's the definition of flexibility, I don't know, but it was an opportunity to do something different and work with multiple organisations, but leveraging the same sort of skill set. So I think it's a great opportunity today to obviously talk about what flexible work means, because you open up newspapers or LinkedIn in particular, and there seems to be a myriad of definitions. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion.
Cool, terrific. And Bel, thank you again for joining us. So Bel Morgan, multi-talented, so flexible work advisor, leadership trainer, speaker, leadership consultant, facilitator, and also author, having published Solving the Part-Time Puzzle. So welcome, Bel, and thank you for joining us on our respective couches. As we said, we want to explore that topic of flexible work and really, talk about sort of, I suppose it's been highlighted and enhanced by the sort of the post-COVID experience, and we've now got the challenges of remote working and hybrid teams. How do you attract and retain talent? So it really, again, great opportunity for us to sharpen our focus, as Sue said, learn a little bit more, maybe, bust or burst some myths that we might have. So thank you very much. But before we get into the topic, maybe tell us your story.
Sure, and thanks for having me, Damien and Sue. Great to have a discussion with you today. So my story and how I got into this, I think, I didn't realise at the time, but in retrospect, it started right from my first grad role out of uni, and I was an accountant back then. I started out as an auditor in a Big Four accounting firm, and there's lots of things I really liked about it. I actually found the work of auditing quite interesting. It wasn't my passion, I wouldn't say, but it was quite interesting. Great people I worked with. But right from week one, I had this question in my mind: is this the way I want to work? Because, as everybody knows, sometimes the culture in those organisations around work hours and how much input you need to give and how much of your life you need to hand over to the organisation can be a bit extreme. So I found myself working really, really crazy hours, and also seeing people around me kind of not being necessarily productive all day because they knew they had to be there till 10 o'clock at night to be seen there. And, just this question in my mind right from day one around what's the best way to be working, as well as what's the most interesting work I can be doing. And so I stuck it out for a year, and then for that very reason decided to move on to a smaller kind of mid-tier accounting firm that had a lot more flexibility around hours, or more sensible work hours, but also flexibility around things like being able to take extended leave to travel or get international transfers. So really, right from the beginning, I was interested in how do I want to work, as well as what do I want to work on. And then how I got from there to what I do today, I
Mm.
became a leader in that next accounting firm after a while, and suddenly realised actually I wasn't passionate about accounting, which I'd always known, but I did have a real passion for leadership. And so became a leadership consultant in another consulting firm and really loved everything about that. I was just, yeah, so excited to make that transition and learn about talent management and leadership development and executive coaching. And I got into strategy a bit, and everything was going swimmingly until I then had a couple of kids
Right.
and in leadership roles, and decided I wanted to work part-time to integrate work and family better. And suddenly the system wasn't working for me again. It was really hard to be a leader and work part-time hours and get that balance right. And so this time it wasn't so much about changing organisations to find a system that worked for me. The system just was broken everywhere. So that's when I decided to go out on my own and do something about this and really focus in on this topic around time flexibility. So part-time work, job share, how do we get this right for everyone, and especially at senior levels, and wrote a book on that topic.
Great. Sue, did you want to jump in?
And it's interesting because as you say, that whole thing about job sharing and part-time, and I'm guessing, just coming back to the sort of main topic is, I'm guessing your best experience has been having your children. I'm going to give you a pass. But so what's your second best experience that you've had in that sort of career journey?
Oh gosh, I would say that transition actually, when I really realized what I love doing and finding an organization that was willing to take a gamble on me. I'd been an accountant for 6 years by then, and throw me into working on client work in, as I said, this leadership space. And just, I'd always been interested in psychology and just being able to get into that organizational psychology space a bit. And yeah, it was just so fascinating, the learning. So that was probably one of my peak work experiences looking back.
And do you think that they gave you that opportunity because you had earned your stripes, or why do you think that you got that opportunity?
I think looking back, I've made a number of changes to my career. And I think I've just always had the belief that if you want to do something and you try hard enough, you can. And it's partly that, partly the belief that I could do it. And I think that came across, but also a few people were like, well, that's ridiculous. You can't go from being an accountant to a leadership expert. But because I'd had the consulting experience, actually, there was a lot of transferable skills if you really thought about it around working with clients, just in a different subject matter area.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and you're right. A lot of people would question that transition. Equally, in my case, I've come from marketing, and I spent 7 years running facilities and sustainability. And same question was asked: what would a person who does marketing know about, electricity and heating, venting, and cooling systems? And you go, not a lot, but I know how to tell the time. I didn't need to know how the watch worked, so to speak. And I think there's some similarities in what you've just described there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so maybe we sort of sharpen the focus a little bit on flexible work, because, I think at the moment, flexible work means, different things to different people. And coincidentally, I was in the local supermarket literally yesterday talking to a colleague and friends, and she talked about the fact that she's thinking about trying to implement a model of year on, year off in terms of job share. So trying to sort of say, because recognise that at times at the end of the year gets burnt out. And so she was curious about, is there an opportunity to actually do that style of job share? And it was really timely, because I think, maybe start off with the definition, what actually is flexible work, because I think it does mean different things to different people. When you talk about flexible work, how do you think about it?
Yeah, thanks, Damien. It's a really good question, because I think in so many people's minds right now, flexible work means working from home for knowledge workers, and whether you can do that or not. Yeah, so really, if we think about what flexible work means very broadly, it's about the ability to have flexibility in where you work, but not just for knowledge workers. Of course, it's more broadly flexibility in where you work, when you work. So, different start and finish times can be an example of that. Or for shift workers, some say into how their shifts are organised and when they have time off. And So when you work, and then how much you work, coming back to this idea of part-time and job share, or, you know, the example you shared about someone asked, you know, talking about year on, year off. So that's really what it means at the moment. It is expanding out also into what you work on. And I think this is going to be part of what the future of flexibility looks like too. So this idea of job crafting and more flex around, here's the core of your role, but based on your unique skills and experiences and where your passions lie, what else do you want to spend your time on?
Interesting. Yeah, and I think, I mean, and this is not a sort of a history quiz, but obviously the volume got turned up on this topic, you know, during and post COVID. So when do you think the concept of flexible work really started to emerge as a key topic?
I think as a key topic, it was COVID. COVID was the tipping point. Before that, we'd been, you know, Nick Bloom's one of the leading experts in remote work, and he's been talking about it since, you know, 2010 odd, when, you know, the tech boom came in and there was email and instant messaging and, you know, after a little while video conferencing. So that's been going on, but I'd never heard of him or thought about that much. Or, you know, since women entered the workforce en masse, you know, how do you balance family and kids, and time flexibility's been a question for families. But really, it was a perk for some people rather than how do we change the way we work and let's make this a system that everyone can and should take advantage of. And COVID's what really changed it to the latter.
And which is a nice segue, and then I'll ask one more question, Sue, and then I'll hand over to you. But, you know, so if I'm an employer, right? So a lot of what we've talked about is, you know, from a you know, an employee's perspective. But if I'm an employer, you know, why should I be interested in this topic, do you think?
Well, partly because it is just the future, whether we like it or not. We're in the middle of a huge transformation to the way we all work, and we're not going to be going back. So if you want to be able to attract and retain the best talent in future, you really have to be getting on board. But also, I think for employers, we often think about it as a either or, you know, it's a trade-off. If I give my team members the flexibility they want, it comes at a cost to performance or to outputs. And that's just absolutely not the case. So businesses should care about this, because if you get flexible working right, it has, research shows now, it has basically no impact on performance. And we're talking about hybrid working specifically here, because this is what people's concern is at the moment. Little to no impact on output and performance, and a huge positive impact on retention and on absence, which means net positive on the bottom line, basically.
Yeah, very interesting.
I think, as you said, there's a lot of talk about it. Do you think that some businesses may be getting shamed into having to offer it, even though they go, you know, no two people are the same, so no two organisations should be the same either. And it comes to that, probably that question around culture. So, you know, that's a double-edged question. So, you know, do you think people are getting, how does culture impact whether a business chooses or not to offer different things to different employees? What do you think the impact is?
There's a big impact. And what else has a big impact, which is, of course, part of what drives culture, is who the leader of that organisation is. So, for example, organisations with kind of older white men, not surprisingly, are more likely to have return to work mandates having been put in place in the last couple of years. And, you know, it's not, that sounds like a criticism, but it's just around based on their experience of work and what's worked for them and what they believe is the right way to work in driving the policy. Because we haven't had all the research and all the data to, you know, for other people in the organisation to say, actually, we should do this because this is what everyone else is doing and has done and what the research shows. So culture has a big impact. And interesting in your question about are organisations being shamed into it, Sue? Do you want to tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that, actually?
Well, I suppose you look at some roles, you know, you can't be a nurse, for example, and work from home if you're a nurse in a emergency department. And so there seems to be this big focus on those organisations that can, and those and then there's roles that just it doesn't fit. And it sort of feels like the ones that where you're not a nurse or you're in an emergency department, that therefore your organisation should be able to offer it and almost must. And it's almost like this cognitive dissonance that you continue to read about why this is so important. Is that because they're trying to share the message or reinforce the fact that their organisation has made the right decision about their approach to flexible and hybrid working?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot in there. I think organisations are feeling pressure to provide remote working and hybrid working where they can, and I think a lot of that is coming from the bottom up. It's what people want. It's interesting, this kind of haves and have-nots when it comes to a nurse or anyone else who's a frontline worker, or doesn't have to be a frontline worker, anyone whose job requires them to be on site somewhere. And this is really important, tying it back to what is flexibility, that flexibility isn't just where you work. And so one of the things that we really need to work on to get rid of, or, help manage this haves and have-nots kind of real frustration that's coming out in so many organisations, is being clear that actually there's these other forms of flexibility that you can access if you're a shift worker or a site-based worker. Here's what they are. Here's what's on our flex menu. What can we offer you here? Because we can't offer you the ability to work from home if you work in an intensive care ward, for example. So that's one of the things that I think the future of this discussion is really going to focus on. How do we make everyone feel included, and give, it's not just about feeling included, actually give them some say over the way they work.
And therefore, do you is that going to be sort of a top-down decision, or you mentioned it's more bottom-up? Do you think that's what's going to drive the change?
I think it's both. I think absolutely bottom up, but more and more people will go to recruiters now, for example, and say, I want this and this and this when it comes to flexibility. And the best performers absolutely have choice over accessing those things. But I do think, as I say, we're in the middle of this kind of huge transformation to the way we work, and there's the early adopters and there's the laggers, but absolutely in, I don't know how many years' time, but in a number of years' time, we're not going to be talking about where we work anymore, for example. We're just going to be talking about how we work in a hybrid manner, or in, incorporating remote workers.
Cool. Do you have one more question, Sue?
I was just sort of thinking about that, and that obviously lends itself to the whole AI discussion that's also going on as well, because some of the roles won't even exist. So let alone not worrying about where you work or what you do, it's just that role is no longer the same as what it was either. So I think you're spot on when we're going through this big sort of systemic change to what work is and what work looks like.
Tech is a huge part of it, not just the work from home piece, the tech. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Damien, go ahead.
No, sorry, but my bad. Because we spoke with a bit of a guru on AI recently and talked exactly about that, in terms of how, and you talked about how you leverage skills. And one of the things that Tiff talked about was that, she talked about AI being a major transformation, and the people that are going to thrive, are the ones that actually leverage AI to actually take some of the components of their job and get AI to do it, which then frees them up to do other components of their job as well. So yes, there's some common themes coming through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which is a nice, maybe or Sue, did you want to ask about myths before I move on to the future?
So yeah, is that the biggest myth? Is this sort of the haves and the have-nots, and what does it look like? And it's an either or discussion. Would that be the biggest myth, that it's either this or that?
Yeah, I think it is. It's this myth about the trade-offs, exactly as you're saying. And what I like to say is that flexible work and performance, they don't go head to head, they go hand in hand. So when you get flexible working right, and this is critical, putting effort, the organisations who are doing this well are actually putting teams together that, cross facilities and IT and people teams, bringing that together to think about, how do we create the right work environment? How do we get the systems right? And really changing the way that we work. And if you do all that well, it's not the case of the trade-offs or the either or going head to head. It's actually, you're going to boost your performance.
Yeah, cool. And then maybe it might shift us into the future. So we'll ask you to put your crystal ball on, and you talked about the fact that this won't be you're almost like, if I understood you correctly, you're sort of saying at some stage this will stop being a topic of conversation because it'll be just how things are done around here, if you like. So, what do you think, for us to make that, that shift, what's the next big topic or challenge that we need to get our heads around if we want to continue moving towards that flexible work environment?
And I think, particularly this question of should we go back to the office or not won't be a question. It'll just be, we're just not all in the office all the time. No one is. And I think what we need to do, or some of the things that we need to do to move to that future state where that just works well and where it's not another huge job for managers to have on top of their busy day jobs, working out how to get this right, as it feels right now for many of them, is first give managers the skills and the training. So last I saw, and this was maybe 6 months ago, around 30% of managers in Australia, and I'm sure this would be similar globally, have had any training on how to lead flexible and hybrid teams.
Yeah.
And so giving managers, we know managers, and I know I don't need to tell either of you this, they're the key, the meat in the sandwich to getting any change right. And this is no different. So give them the skills, put the systems in place. So have a look at, the tech and the facilities, and have a think about, connection is the number one thing I hear from executives all the time. But what about team connection?
Yeah.
So have a think about, Atlassian, for example, are at the forefront of this, and they are remote first, but all their teams come together, as you may know, every 6 months in person. And they really consciously design the few days they come together to maximize team connection, to get work done that's best done in person. And what they find is that feelings of team connection go up by 27% at those events and don't start dissipating for months and months afterwards. So it's about rethinking what being connected means and how we get it right, in summary. So that's some of the things we need to do. Another one is thinking about that performance management as well, and how do we manage performance on outputs versus presence, and even to take that another level, legislation even measures, or our roles, in terms of what the legislation says, or how many hours we work is how you structure a role and put a role in place. So how do we even rethink that?
Yeah, cool. And so that's another question from me then. So if we, sometimes when we think about flexible work, and we naturally gravitate to large organizations, those businesses that have got scale and got resources, and you talked about the benefit of getting someone from IT and people in performance, and to think about how we work and bring this to life. What about, I would imagine, part of your work, you also work with smaller and medium businesses, and, and that's sometimes they don't have those resources. So, from your perspective, what are the opportunities from smaller and medium businesses? And is it simply just the same?
I think actually flexible work can have even more positive benefits for small to medium businesses. So, it sounds like, so you're doing fractional working or fractional kind of executive roles potentially. So the ability to access high level talent at, in a fractional way or part-time capacity can be really helpful for smaller to medium businesses. If we think once again about the expanded definition of flexible working, but even being able to access talent from all sorts of different locations can be really helpful for small to medium businesses, particularly if there's some kind of niche area you're working in. So that can be really helpful. I think the other interesting thing, like with any change, it can be actually easier. And it once again depends on who the leadership team is and what their objectives and ideas are around this topic, but can actually be easier to change your flexible working practices in those businesses because there's less red tape and all that kind of things involved. So I actually think there's lots of opportunities, and, with a little bit of support and advice, there's a lot of upside for small to medium businesses when it comes to the future of flexible working.
Yeah, great. And that's a really good point. That ability to tap into expertise, it's much more accessible now, really, isn't it? If you're a small to medium, if you're,
absolutely.
Okay. Cool.
So you've written a book as well, obviously, and I think Damien's named the topic "Solving the Part-Time Puzzle." So tell us a little bit about the book.
Yes, so this was a couple of years ago, and it was, this it started off with my experience of working in a leadership role on a part-time basis and just thinking we need to do this better. And so I went out and interviewed a bunch of really senior leaders who were doing that successfully, including executive team members, partners in law firms, things like that, who were working part-time and doing it successfully. So not just, squishing 5 days of work into 3 and calling it part-time. And one of the common scenarios.
Yeah.
And really, it's a how-to guide on how to set up and succeed in a senior level part-time role, which was fascinating to explore, and been really, really helpful for people to use it as that kind of guidebook to help set themselves up for success.
And what sort of feedback have you had from people that have read the book and then applied the principles? And what's their takeout, and what's your takeout been hearing their experience?
I think that's one of the very best things about having written a book. The process was a bit painful at times, but actually hearing feedback that it's helped people has been fabulous. So, there was one leader, for example, of the Australian arm of a consulting firm who was, transitioning to retirement and wanted to move to 4 days a week and then 3 days a week. And I don't even know how she came across my book, but she contacted me out of the blue to say how helpful it had been. So, and I think for her, some of the key takeaways were around this: how do you actually scope a role so it's truly part-time, not just squishing the same role into less hours? And how do you take advantage of the team members around you and put the right support in place? So that was a really big one. And then just this idea that, another key takeaway is that there's so much stigma around this. So how do you kind of reduce that and minimize it by demonstrating how it can be done and being confident about the fact that this is possible, and really being a role model? So lots of people have really given great feedback around, I feel like I can role model this well now, and that's part of why I'm excited about doing this too, to help these coming up behind me.
Because it must be quite challenging for that example that you give from a person that's in a high leadership role, a partner or whatever in a firm, having to sort of recognizing that that's going to be the right decision for them, but relinquishing, and I use control in inverted commas, but relinquishing that, because you're not going to be able to be across everything. You have to change the way you, not only change the way you work, but the way you think about what you do as well.
Absolutely. And this is where I kind of draw on my leadership background and talk about, the best leaders aren't the ones with their fingers in the pie all the time, every second of the day. They're the ones who kind of set the objectives, make sure people are clear, motivate and remove roadblocks, and then just get out of the way. And so in one way, leaders are actually in a better position than anyone else to work part-time, is how I like to think about it.
That's a great analogy, because you're right. You have to be able to take that one step back, so you become almost a true leader in the sense of the word, in that you have stepped away and let people, provide them the guardrails, the support, and let them get on and get what they need to do done.
Absolutely.
Cool. Bel, thank you. We could keep on talking. A really, really interesting discussion, and so thank you very much, and certainly some great insights for me, and got me thinking about a number of different things. Certainly from a leadership perspective, and I really like that where we ended up with that last discussion as well. If people want to learn more, if we want to learn more, where do we go? There's an opportunity for you to highlight your programs. Are you writing another book? Where do we buy your first book? Opportunity to continue to promote yourself, but also more importantly to learn about this important topic.
Thanks, Damien. So the best places to get in touch with me are on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on there. On my website, belindamorgan.com. And then in terms of what's next, I don't have another book in the works yet. There will be one, but not coming this year.
Yep.
But what I'm focusing on this year, a couple of things. So speaking. So if you've got team events or leadership offsites or conferences and you want to upskill your team around this topic of flexible working, would absolutely love to hear from you. Right. And also this niche around part-time and job share at senior levels. So I'm focusing on some programs and a community for people in those types of roles this year too.
Yeah, that's good. That's exciting. So your takeaway, I always ask you this question, what did Bel get you thinking about? What are your insights from today's discussion?
I think, for me, it was that question, that what is leadership. That's to me what came through loud and clear, and I think it's a great reminder. And this is, you know, another way of really defining leadership and how you lead people and achieve, as you say, objectives or goals, but get out of the way. And in a way, it's almost a discipline to be a better leader when you start to think about it in the context of our discussion.
Yeah, great, terrific. So thank you, Sue. Bel, thank you so much for being on our couch. Really appreciate your time and your expertise. So thank you very much for that. Sue and I look forward to bringing you our next edition of On My Couch. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about OMC Group, it's omc-group.com.au, and we'll see you all next time. Cheers.